Printer Control by Mika Pai, Chapter 1, The Ominous Message. The office hums with a steady, muted energy under the unforgiving glare of fluorescent lights. Rows of cubicles stretch into the distance, each one a little box of buzzing computers, quiet typing, and the occasional murmur of conversation. The air is faintly tinged with stale coffee and printer ink, giving the place an almost clinical sterility. Employees move through the familiar patterns of corporate life, checking emails, crossing tasks off lists, and exchanging polite, obligatory greetings. Ben, a mid-level analyst in a sea of mid-level analysts, sits at his desk near the center of it all, his corner of the office meticulously organized. Known around the office for his attention to detail, Ben is the sort who arrives 10 minutes early, keeps his desk neat, and never leaves a project unfinished. He moves through his work with a quiet precision, almost blending into his surroundings, the dependable cog in the company's machine. He glances up at the clock, its digital face glaring in bright red, 3:14 p.m. Time to grab the quarterly report he'd printed earlier. Routine tasks like these keep him anchored, a small comfort in the otherwise sterile, predictable world of office life. Ben stretches his shoulders and pushes back from his desk, standing up just as his colleague Lily passes by with a stack of folders balanced in her arms.
Hey Ben, did you catch the meeting invite for next week? Apparently, it's another vision alignment session.
Another one. How many times can we align in a month?
Lily chuckles, rolling her eyes.
Tell me about it. At this point, they should just rename it Weekly Reminder We Work Here.
Across the aisle, Jane, the senior manager, perks up, overhearing the conversation. Oh, the vision alignment session? I'll be out next week for that executive conference anyway. Lucky me.
I knew I was in the wrong department. Sounds like senior management has all the perks.
Jane gives him an approving nod, her smirk deepening before she heads back to her office. Lily shifts her folders, nudging Ben.
By the way, if you get a minute later, I could use a second set of eyes on that budget breakdown. You're the spreadsheet whisperer around here.
Spreadsheet whisperer? Now that's a title. Sure, I'll swing by after I grab my report.
Thanks, Ben.
Ben watches her go, still faintly amused by their banter. As he heads toward the printer room, a flicker of satisfaction settles over him. A sense that, if nothing else, he's well anchored in this world. He fits. He's useful. The thought puts a small, contented smile on his face as he steps into the printer room, ready to collect his report. The quiet whir of the printer greets Ben as he steps into the small, windowless room. A few loose pages lie scattered on the tray, and he sorts through them with practiced efficiency, skimming to find his report. His fingers pause when they touch a page that stands out starkly from the others. A single sheet printed in large, bold letters.
Do not take the 6 train tomorrow.
The words are impossible to ignore, each letter thick and sharp against the stark white paper. Ben blinks, momentarily thrown, his brain working to catch up with what he's reading. He flips the page over, half expecting to find some explanation on the back, but it's blank. He stands there, frowning. Maybe it's someone else's document, a strange one-off, maybe even a joke. He scans the room as if the culprit might suddenly appear and claim it, but no one else is around. Glancing down again, he notices how deliberate the message seems. No other context, no logos or letterhead, just the cryptic warning. Shaking his head, Ben sets the page aside, telling himself it's probably nothing, just some weird print job gone wrong. He finds his own report, neatly bound and printed, and grabs it. Still, as he leaves the room, he glances back at the page on the tray, the bold letters practically calling to him. An unsettling feeling crawls into his stomach as he walks away, pushing the thought to the back of his mind. The next morning, Ben is running a bit later than usual, having lingered over breakfast longer than he'd planned. His mind still occasionally drifts back to that strange printer message, the warning to avoid the 6 train. Despite his best efforts, he hadn't quite managed to shake it off. As he waits for his coffee to brew, he absently scrolls through his XCOM feed, thumbing past the usual string of headlines and updates. A breaking news alert catches his eye. Breaking, 6 train derails in Lower Manhattan, multiple casualties reported. The post comes from a local news outlet, accompanied by shaky video footage showing chaotic scenes around the station. EMTs rush injured commuters out on stretchers, and emergency responders swarm the area. The thread below is filled with comments, people tagging loved ones, sharing live updates, and posting their disbelief. Ben's thumb hovers over the screen, his heartbeat picking up as he reads the post. His apartment, a modest one-bedroom in the East Village, is only a few blocks away from the 6 train stop on Astor Place. He glances at the clock. It's almost 8:30 a.m. If he'd taken his usual morning train, he might have been on it when the accident happened. Still gripping his phone, he scrolls down, searching for more information. Another post appears from a witness on the scene.
I was there. Smoke and dust everywhere. People were helping each other out of the wreckage. Can't believe it. My heart goes out to everyone on that train.
His pulse quickens, mind racing back to the message he'd found yesterday. Do not take the 6 train tomorrow. The words flash in his mind, suddenly sharp, impossible to dismiss. He tries to shake off the dread pooling in his stomach, but it settles heavily there, unmistakable. A few stops over in Brooklyn, people are posting about delayed trains and emergency diversions. Another X.com account shares a video showing a crowd gathering outside the Bleecker Street station. The platform packed with people staring, some in horror, at the scene below. Ben sets down his phone, staring into the middle distance. He knows he should feel relieved to have avoided the accident, but instead he feels a growing unease, as if the floor has tilted beneath him. It wasn't a coincidence. That message had been there on the printer, waiting for him. Forcing himself to breathe slowly, he wonders if someone could be playing an elaborate, cruel prank. Yet, as he plays the possibilities over in his mind, none of them make sense. Before leaving for work, he opens X.com one last time and scrolls past the flood of emergency updates and personal accounts. He doesn't know what to call the feeling he has, a combination of disbelief and dread, but the reality is impossible to ignore. In the cold morning light, the message now feels like a warning he wasn't supposed to ignore, a warning that saved his life. Ben arrives at the office, but everything feels off. The usual rhythm of his morning routine, coffee refill, nodding hellos to passing colleagues, logging in to check emails, barely registers. His thoughts keep circling back to the printer, that warning, and the disturbing truth. If he hadn't heeded it, he might not be here right now. As he settles at his desk, his phone buzzes with yet another update from X.com. It's a photo of the wreckage, the twisted metal of the derailed 6 train under the hazy morning sun, bits of debris scattered along the tracks. He stares at the image longer than he should, his mind refusing to move past it. Lily leans over from her cubicle, waving a hand in front of his face.
Earth to Ben, you okay?
Yeah. Just, did you see the news? The train derailment?
She nods, a sympathetic look crossing her face.
It's awful. So close, too. Astor Place, right? You don't take that train, do you?
No, I don't. Just weird timing, I guess.
She nods, accepting this, and heads off to refill her coffee, leaving him alone with his unease. He opens his email, trying to dive into work, but the text blurs in front of him as he replays the events again and again. The feeling gnaws at him, a creeping sense that someone or something had deliberately warned him. Or worse, that someone had known exactly what was going to happen. The rest of the day crawls by, with Ben barely registering the usual office banter around him. He catches himself glancing toward the hallway leading to the printer room, half expecting to see another strange message waiting for him there. His coworkers notice his distraction, and he forces himself to laugh off their lighthearted jokes about zoning out and finally needing that coffee. But whenever his eyes drift toward the door of the printer room, a chill crawls up his spine. As absurd as it sounds, he can't shake the feeling that something in there is waiting for him, a quiet, almost expectant presence behind that closed door. He tries to brush off the thought, telling himself it's just a machine, but the unease lingers. It's as if the printer has somehow become a silent observer in his life, a strange force biding its time in that dark, windowless room. That evening, as he walks back to his East Village apartment, the streetlights casting long shadows on the sidewalk, Ben goes over the events in his mind again. He tries to explain it away, telling himself it could have been a lucky coincidence, a random glitch, or a strange office prank. But the weight of the thought presses in on him, suffocating and undeniable. As he closes his apartment door behind him, he realizes one thing with certainty. His life no longer feels like his own. Chapter 2: The Warning Cycle. The following week, Ben finds himself treading more carefully through his days, glancing over his shoulder, scanning the office like someone searching for an invisible stalker. It's not long before another warning appears, printed in the same ominous, bold type.
Leave your desk before noon.
Ben reads the page in the silent printer room, the hum of machines around him, oddly foreboding. The message has the same peculiar sense of command, the same unsettling tone, and he feels his stomach churn with the memory of the last warning and its accuracy. Without a word, he folds the paper and slips it into his pocket, returning to his desk. He glances at the office clock, 11:56. The usual hum of voices and keyboard taps continues around him, but today they feel sharper, like every sound is cutting through his skin. He has no reason to leave, but the message's weight nags at him, prickling the back of his neck. Ben stands abruptly, muttering something about a coffee run, and heads toward the break room. Just as he steps away from his desk, there's a loud metallic crash from above, followed by a spray of ceiling dust. A chunk of the air conditioning duct has fallen right where he'd been sitting.
Oh my God! Ben, if you hadn't gotten up, are you okay?
Yeah, I just needed some air.
Her concerned look lingers, but she eventually returns to her desk, glancing back at him, shaking her head in quiet amazement. Ben, on the other hand, heads to the break room and leans heavily against the counter, staring at the clock as it ticks to 12:01. He feels sick, the remnants of dust from the crash still swirling faintly in the air, but his mind is already trying to make sense of it all. The next day, he finds another message waiting for him on the printer.
Warn her not to answer the call.
This one is stranger, more cryptic. But as noon approaches, Ben decides he can't ignore it. He watches Lily from his desk, the uneasy feeling mounting as he catches her glancing at her ringing phone. He jumps up, calling over to her.
Lily, don't pick up.
Why? Are you screening my calls now?
Just trust me, okay?
Lily shrugs, ignoring the call, and a few minutes later, the office manager walks by, mentioning casually,
Oh, by the way, Lily, I got a scam alert this morning. Some fake HR rep's been calling around, fishing for info. Good thing you missed it.
Ben nods numbly, his suspicion growing as he glances back toward the printer room. It's not just predicting events anymore. The warnings are intervening in his choices, subtly steering him, and now Lily. Over the next few days, more messages appear. Each one sends his heart into his throat, each one predicting some danger or accident with disturbing accuracy.
Do not enter the parking garage. Avoid the lobby after 5 p.m.
As the messages pile up, Ben begins to feel like he's being maneuvered through his life, like a puppet guided by the invisible hands behind the printer. He finds himself scanning his surroundings constantly, on edge, anticipating danger everywhere he goes. Despite the warnings, he feels trapped, as though each message binds him tighter to an invisible force, a force that knows more about his life than he does. One morning, after a sleepless night, he leans over to Marco at the break room counter, the usually playful gleam in his eyes replaced by worry.
Marco, have you ever felt like someone's messing with your choices?
Oh, every day. But go on. Do you think it's the CIA? Or maybe aliens?
Ben forces a smile, though his voice is tense.
I don't know what it is, but something is sending me messages, telling me to avoid things, people, places, and every time I listen, something bad happens anyway, just not to me.
Marco's playful expression fades, replaced with a curious frown.
You're serious?
Dead serious.
Marco rubs his chin thoughtfully, his eyes lighting up with excitement and fear.
Man, if this is real, then we're talking next-level stuff here, like fate manipulation. You could be some kind of test subject, Ben.
Ben looks down at his coffee, his grip tightening. He doesn't feel like a test subject. He feels like a pawn. And as he watches the printer out of the corner of his eye, he realizes that the messages aren't just warnings. They're demands, dictating every step he takes. A new kind of dread settles in his chest. The warnings aren't just saving him from accidents. They're controlling him. The printer's warnings keep coming, each one dragging Ben further from any sense of normalcy, his mind in a constant state of alarm. He feels alone, like he's been wrenched out of his usual life and thrust into a strange, hidden reality. By the end of the week, he's barely sleeping, jumping at every sound. He knows he can't keep this up alone. He needs help, but from who? The following morning, he catches Lily in the break room, her head buried in a tech magazine. He takes a deep breath, weighing his words, and clears his throat.
Hey, Lily, you got a sec?
For the spreadsheet whisperer? Always. What's up? You look off.
Ben hesitates, running a hand through his hair.
This is going to sound strange, but I keep getting these messages. From the printer.
Her brows knit together, and she looks at him skeptically.
Messages like what, paper jam warnings?
No, like warnings about specific things, places, people, times. They tell me to avoid certain places, leave at specific times, and each time I listen, something happens right after, something dangerous.
She stares at him for a beat, clearly trying to process.
You're serious?
Dead serious. I have proof. I've been documenting them.
Lily sets down her magazine and crosses her arms.
All right, I'll bite. Maybe there's some glitch in the system or some weird prank. I can dig through the printer logs and see if anything stands out.
Thanks, Lily. I know it sounds nuts, but something about this feels wrong.
Just then, Marco, the new hire from accounting, steps into the break room. He's carrying a suspiciously large thermos and overhears the tail end of their conversation.
Did I hear printer pranks? I'm in. What's the deal?
Lily shoots Ben a questioning glance, and he hesitates. But then he remembers Marco's fondness for conspiracy theories and thinks maybe, just maybe, his curiosity could be useful.
Okay, this is going to sound crazy, but I keep getting these warnings from the office printer, and every time it's like it's trying to prevent something bad from happening.
Marco's face lights up.
Warnings? Dude, that's like fate manipulation. Maybe it's the government. Or aliens. Could even be some super advanced AI testing human responses. Do you realize what this could mean?
Trust me, I've thought about it. But I don't know if it's a prank or something bigger, just that it's real.
Lily rolls her eyes but reluctantly nods.
I'll check the logs. But if you're pranking us, Ben, I'm deleting all your data from the cloud.
Marco chuckles, leaning closer, conspiratorial.
Ben, if this is legit, you could be some kind of experiment subject. We have to track these messages, maybe even test them. Push back.
I thought the same thing, actually, that maybe I need to test it, ignore a warning, but every time I consider it, something holds me back.
Fear, man. That's how these things work. They control you through fear. We have to start challenging these messages. Lily can get into the system, see if it's coming from anywhere specific. And I'll handle, the bigger picture theories.
Just as they're wrapping up, Jane, a senior manager known for her cold professionalism, steps into the break room, stopping when she notices the huddle. Her gaze lingers on Ben, calculating. What's this about? For a moment, Ben hesitates. Jane is notorious for her secrecy, her stiff professionalism, the rumor mill swirling with stories of skeletons in her closet. But maybe that's why she could understand, maybe even help. He decides to take the risk.
Jane, this is going to sound strange, but I've been receiving these warnings. They're printed messages, and every time I follow them, something bad happens. Like a warning for my safety.
Jane's face remains impassive, though her eyes narrow slightly. Warnings from the printer?
I know how it sounds, but Lily's going to check the logs, and Marco's helping me figure out what could be behind this. I thought you might want to know, especially if something were to happen.
Jane crosses her arms, considering. I don't have time for office games, Ben. But if what you're saying is true, then it could mean our privacy is compromised. I'd hate to think someone in this office is pulling strings like this. She finally nods reluctantly. Fine, I'll keep an ear out. But this better not waste my time. As she leaves, Ben feels a strange, cautious optimism. His small circle has taken shape, each member with their own motivations and doubts. They may not fully believe him, but they're drawn to the mystery, each person bringing a unique perspective that he hopes will help unravel what's going on. But as they leave the break room, he catches sight of the printer in the corner, its green light flickering idly, waiting. He feels a chill, as if the machine is aware of them gathering, as if it's listening. Whatever this force is, it has Ben, and now his allies, right where it wants them. The following day, the printer room feels more ominous than usual. Ben stands before the machine, staring at the tray as if it holds secrets he just has to unlock. He's barely slept, his mind looping around questions, possibilities, fears. The warnings have been so precise, so targeted, but their origin remains a mystery, and that gnaws at him. Determined to push the boundaries, he pulls out his phone and drafts a few messages, feeling slightly foolish but compelled to try. He types, "Who are you?" The screen stares back at him, silent. His fingers hover and he adds, "What do you want?" With a deep breath, he clicks print. The printer whirs to life, and Ben feels his pulse spike. A single page emerges, and he snatches it from the tray, reading eagerly. But it's only a blank page, as if mocking his attempt to get answers. Lily's voice startles him.
Anything?
Nothing. It's like it's watching, but won't answer. I keep getting warnings, but when I ask anything directly, I get nothing.
Lily steps forward, peering over his shoulder.
Checked the logs last night. No anomalies, no strange documents sent remotely, nothing. As far as IT's concerned, these warnings are just normal print jobs. It's like the messages are coming from nowhere.
I don't get it, Lily. It's almost like it doesn't want me to understand. Like it's only interested in controlling me, guiding me even.
Guiding you? Look, Ben, I'm not saying I believe in some printer prophecy or anything, but maybe it's just trying to mess with you. Have you thought of ignoring it completely?
He opens his mouth to respond, but Marco strides into the room, holding up his phone.
I did some digging. Turns out there's a whole subset of urban legends about stuff like this. Machines acting weird, like supernatural conduits. Some think it's an advanced AI, or even entities using technology to interact with humans. I'm just saying it's possible.
Ben exchanges a glance with Lily, whose face is unreadable. She gives Marco a weary look.
And that's helpful how?
It's helpful because it means we need to be strategic. Maybe it's a test. Maybe it's feeding you these warnings to see if you'll listen, to see how far it can push you.
So what? It's testing my obedience like a game?
Or worse, maybe it's trying to get you to question your own judgment until you rely on it completely.
Ben feels a chill at her words, realizing that's exactly how he started to feel. Dependent on the messages, waiting for them, even searching for them. He hadn't noticed how deeply he'd slipped into that pattern until she pointed it out. Just then, Jane strides in, catching the tail end of the conversation. She's visibly tense, her face drawn, her eyes scanning the room with uncharacteristic worry. "I just got a message myself." She hands Ben a single sheet, the familiar bold letters spelling out,
"Do not disclose."
Ben feels a jolt of recognition, noting the personal nature of the warning.
Disclose what?
"That's none of your business, Ben, but it means this thing, whatever it is, knows things it shouldn't. Things that are private. If it's trying to scare me, it's doing a hell of a job." Lily looks between them, her skepticism faltering.
So it's not just trying to control Ben anymore, it's targeting each of us?
"If it is, I'm not playing along. I don't know what kind of game this is, but I'm not letting some ghost in the machine dictate my life." Marco, undeterred, steps forward.
Or maybe that's exactly what it wants. Rebellion, tension. Maybe it's feeding off our reactions, just seeing what we'll do.
I'm done with it playing us. If it's trying to test us or control us, I'm going to push back. If it won't answer directly, then maybe I'll have to ignore it, stop following its orders.
Are you sure about that? We don't know what'll happen if you ignore one. What if ignoring it provokes something?
"Ben, you do whatever you want, but if you're not careful, you could be endangering more than just yourself." A heavy silence falls over them. They all realize the stakes are growing, that this isn't just a series of strange messages anymore. It's personal. And the printer, or whatever controls it, seems to know each of their vulnerabilities, every crack in their armor. Ben glances around the small circle, feeling both emboldened and haunted by what they've uncovered. Whatever this force is, it's infiltrated their lives, made them pawns in its twisted game. And yet it refuses to reveal itself, leaving them in an agonizing state of doubt and dependence. As they file out of the room, each lost in their own thoughts, Ben lingers behind, casting one last glance at the printer, the green light blinking idly, almost mockingly. He feels a simmering anger rise within him. It may be watching, guiding, even controlling him, but he's determined to reclaim his life, even if it means defying the next message and facing whatever consequences come next. The next warning comes through late on a Friday afternoon, materializing on the printer tray without so much as a sound. Ben feels the familiar pulse of dread as he picks it up, the words staring back at him in bold black ink.
Do not meet him for dinner.
Ben curses under his breath. He's supposed to meet Alex, a former coworker, for dinner tonight, a casual catch-up that's been on the calendar for weeks. He stares at the page, torn between compliance and defiance. The warnings have been eerily accurate up until now, but Marco's words echo in his mind.
Fear, man. That's how these things work. They control you through fear.
He's tired of being controlled, of jumping at shadows and living by the whim of a machine.
I'm not a puppet. I'm not.
The decision is made. Tonight, he'll go to dinner, warnings be damned. As he walks to the restaurant, the city feels alive in a way he hasn't noticed in weeks. Street vendors shout out their specials, couples stroll arm in arm, and the sounds of honking cars mix with bursts of laughter from open-air bars. For the first time in a long while, Ben almost feels like himself again, untethered, free. He takes a deep breath, savoring the air. Tonight, he's calling the shots. Alex is already at the table when Ben arrives, a beer in hand and a grin on his face.
Ben, long time, man. Good to see you.
You too.
He pushes it away, focusing on the conversation, letting himself sink into the comfort of familiar banter about old colleagues and office politics. For an hour, he almost forgets about the warnings, the tension, the paranoia. As they finish their meal, Alex slaps down his credit card, insisting on paying.
You can get the next one. We should make this a regular thing.
Yeah, I'd like that.
They part ways outside the restaurant, the cool evening air brushing against Ben's face. He watches as Alex crosses the street, heading toward his car. For a brief moment, everything feels normal, almost pleasant. Ben takes a deep breath, savoring the rare sense of peace, allowing himself to imagine that maybe, just maybe, he's managed to outpace the warnings. He turns and starts walking, his footsteps echoing softly in the quiet streets. He's almost halfway down the block when his phone vibrates in his pocket, breaking the stillness. At first, he assumes it's a message, but the persistent buzz tells him it's a call. He frowns, pulling his phone out and seeing the unknown number on the screen. Hesitating, he finally answers.
Hello?
Is this Benjamin Carter? His stomach drops.
Yes, this is Ben.
Sir, we're calling to inform you that your friend, Alex Chambers, was involved in a car accident. He's being transported to New York Presbyterian. You were listed as his emergency contact. Ben's blood runs cold, his heart slamming against his ribs.
What? How bad is it? Is he...
He's alive, but it was a severe collision. You may want to come down as soon as you can. Ben mumbles a thank you, barely hearing his own words. The call ends, leaving him standing on the sidewalk, the city blurring around him. Alex, hurt, maybe worse, all because Ben chose to ignore the warning. A wave of nausea washes over him, and he stumbles, bracing himself against a lamppost. The memory of that simple command,
Do not meet him for dinner.
echoes in his mind, loud and relentless. His phone slips from his grip, clattering onto the pavement, and the distant hum of traffic fades into a muffled roar. He feels a crushing weight settle on his shoulders as he realizes the truth. This isn't just about him. His choices are affecting other people, people who never asked to be dragged into this. Hours later, he sits in the hospital waiting room, his mind racing as he stares at the sterile white walls. The fluorescent lights flicker above him, harsh and relentless. Every sound, each beep of a heart monitor, every shuffle of footsteps feels amplified, pressing into his skull. He'd thought ignoring the warning would be an act of rebellion, a way to reclaim his life. But now, all he can feel is the crushing guilt of knowing his defiance came at a cost. Lily arrives just after midnight, her face pale as she sits down next to him.
What happened?
I ignored a warning. It said not to meet Alex for dinner. I ignored it, and now he's in surgery.
She lets out a slow breath, processing the information.
Jesus, Ben, I thought you said you'd be careful.
I wanted to feel in control. I thought if I ignored it, maybe it would stop. But instead, it just punished me. Or punished him.
Lily's expression shifts, the concern giving way to something darker, fear.
So it's not just you at risk. It's anyone around you.
Yeah, I think this thing, It's willing to hurt people to keep me in line, to make sure I follow its rules.
Marco shows up soon after, bursting through the doors with a notebook full of scribbles.
I came as soon as I heard. You okay, man? What happened?
I ignored a warning, and it cost Alex. He could die because of me.
Marco pales.
Shit. So it really can hurt people. It's not just bluffing.
Jane arrives last, her expression hard, almost unreadable. She crosses her arms, looking down at Ben.
This is what I was afraid of. You thought you could beat it, didn't you? You let your pride get in the way, and now look where we are.
Ben nods numbly, unable to respond. Jane's words hit harder than they should because they're true. He'd been reckless, defiant, and now Alex was paying the price. They sit in silence, the air thick with unspoken fears. It's no longer about who receives the next warning. Now it's about what happens if they don't listen, and the price they'll pay for their choices. Finally, Lily breaks the silence, her voice trembling.
So what do we do now?
We follow the rules. Until we understand what we're dealing with, we follow the damn rules.
Ben slumps in his chair, feeling the last remnants of his autonomy slip away. He thought ignoring a single warning would free him, but instead it's trapped him even more. Now he's not just responsible for himself, he's responsible for everyone caught in this web. And the worst part? He's beginning to think that's exactly what the warnings want. A few days after Alex's accident, the warnings change. Ben can feel it as soon as he picks up the latest printout. This time, it isn't about him directly, but rather about those around him. The message reads,
Lily cannot be trusted.
He stares at the words, feeling a familiar chill. This warning feels different, designed to unsettle him in a new way. Lily has been his closest ally since the warnings began, the one person who believed him enough to dig into the printer logs to take this madness seriously. Now, the message is planting a seed of doubt, one that he's not sure he'll be able to shake. When he finally tells her about the message, her reaction isn't what he expects. Instead of dismissing it, she stiffens, her face hardening.
Ben, I need to know something. Are you making these messages yourself?
Are you serious? You think I'd fake this? After everything we've been through?
She crosses her arms, looking at him as if she's seeing him for the first time.
It wouldn't be the first time someone tried to manipulate people with fear. And lately, you seem different, distant, secretive, almost like you're in control of it somehow.
He opens his mouth to protest, but her shift in tone takes him aback. They stare at each other, a silence stretching between them that feels sharp, fragile, ready to break.
You really think I'd go this far? That I'd risk Alex's life to prove a point?
Lily's eyes soften, but only slightly.
I don't know, Ben. I have to wonder why it's only you getting these messages at first, why it's you who pulled us in, and now that it's targeting me, how do I know this isn't just part of some twisted game you're playing?
The accusation stings deeper than he thought possible. He's always known Lily as a rational mind, logical to a fault, but now, with the messages undermining their trust, her loyalty feels brittle. He can feel the printer's invisible fingers reaching into their friendship, testing it, pushing it to the edge. Ben doesn't have time to process her words before Marco shows up, phone in hand. He looks rattled, an unusual seriousness clouding his typically animated face. He holds up his phone, showing Ben a blurry photo of a message he found waiting for him on the printer that morning. The warning is blunt, almost taunting.
Do not ignore his deception.
Deception. Which one of you is playing me?
Are you kidding me, Marco? You think I'd drag you into this just for fun?
Who knows, man? People are weird. Maybe you're just some pawn in a bigger game and don't even realize it. Or maybe you know exactly what's going on, and you're keeping it from us.
The three of them stand in the dimly lit corner of the office, each casting suspicious glances at one another. The easy camaraderie that once united them has eroded, replaced by silence, as if they're afraid that speaking too openly might reveal something they're not ready to confront.
Let's get Jane in here. Maybe she has a different take on this.
They find Jane in her office, poring over a report. She looks up, her eyes narrowing as the trio enters. Without a word, she reaches into her drawer and pulls out a crumpled piece of paper. She tosses it on her desk, the words bold and stark.
Do not disclose.
The four of them exchange uneasy glances, and Jane's face flushes with anger as she speaks.
I keep getting the same message. Every day, like it's reminding me, do not disclose. It's as if someone thinks they can dictate what I can and can't reveal. None of this is anyone's business.
What secret?
Jane shoots him a hard look, but for a second, Ben thinks he sees a flicker of worry beneath her defiance, a crack in the shield she tries so hard to keep up. A new tension fills the room, a kind of invisible rift pulling each of them in different directions. They stand there, the accusations and doubts swirling around like a thick fog. Each of them looks at one another, wondering who knows more than they're admitting, who might be hiding something, and what the messages truly want from them.
It's almost like it knows exactly where to push us. It knows our fears, our secrets. It's not just warning us anymore, it's exposing us.
Or making us paranoid. So paranoid we start to turn on each other.
It doesn't matter. If this entity thinks it can manipulate me, it's wrong. My private life is my own, and I don't intend to let some twisted mind game interfere with it.
But despite her bravado, Ben can see the fear in her eyes, the way she avoids his gaze as if he might somehow see through her.
We're all being played. Whatever's behind this printer or program or entity, it's pushing us exactly where it wants us. We're not just dealing with random warnings. This is a calculated, deliberate attack.
A silence follows, each of them taking in her words, realizing just how deeply the messages have invaded their minds, their relationships. No longer simple predictions, the warnings have morphed into something far more insidious, a creeping influence that's driving wedges between them, forcing them to question each other, to doubt even the simplest of motives.
So what do? Ignore them? Trust each other anyway?
We stick to the truth. We share everything, every message, every warning, every suspicion. We don't let this thing isolate us.
Lily nods reluctantly, but her expression remains guarded. Marco mutters his agreement, though his eyes dart between the group, still wary, still uncertain. They leave the office one by one, returning to their desks with forced calm, each of them knowing they're walking a fine line between suspicion and loyalty. But Ben feels the weight of the printer's presence, looming over them like a silent conductor, orchestrating their fears, planting seeds of mistrust that now feel impossible to root out. As he sits at his desk, he catches sight of the printer in the corner, its idle green light blinking, a silent reminder that it's watching. The message is clear. It's no longer content with warning them. It's feeding on their doubts, exploiting their fears, and making them question the very foundation of their relationships. And as Ben looks around the room, catching wary glances from Lily, Marco, and Jane, he realizes that the real danger isn't just the warnings. It's the destruction of their trust, a corrosion from within that may well be what the warnings wanted all along. Ben's head spins as he stares at the latest message in his hand, its stark, block letters searing into his mind.
You must choose.
The paper trembles slightly between his fingers. He reads it again, feeling a wave of nausea rise in his chest. It's the first message that doesn't tell him what to avoid or warn him of danger. It's a demand, a command with no explanation, no context. The office around him feels distorted, the fluorescent lights casting an unnatural glow, the quiet hum of machines louder, more oppressive. His small circle, Lily, Marco, and Jane, watches him from across the room, their faces etched with worry and suspicion. Each one seems almost expectant, as if waiting to see what he'll do, how he'll react. He lowers the paper, feeling their eyes on him. The demand pulses in his mind, relentless.
You must choose.
What does it mean?
Ben swallows hard, unable to answer. He doesn't know what he's meant to choose. Between them, between following the warnings or ignoring them, he spent weeks clinging to every command, every warning, letting them guide his life, dictating his every move. But now the decision is his, and the enormity of it leaves him paralyzed.
Whatever this thing is, Ben, it's pushing you to a breaking point. It wants something from you. Maybe it's waiting to see if you'll give in.
Or maybe it's testing your loyalty, to us, to yourself. Maybe it wants you to choose who you'll protect.
The thought chills him to the core. If he's forced to choose, it won't just be about his safety, it will be about who he's willing to sacrifice. And if the warnings have taught him anything, it's that the cost of a choice, once made, can be devastating. Ben looks around at them, feeling the weight of each of their lives on his shoulders. He's been pulled into a web of control, paranoia, and fear, and he's no closer to understanding the source of the messages than when they started. But one thing is clear. It's no longer just his life that hangs in the balance. Taking a deep, shaky breath, he crumples the paper in his fist. Whatever choice lies ahead, he'll have to face it, alone, or risk dragging them all deeper into this twisted game. An invisible pressure mounts within him, ticking down like a clock, a haunting, unanswered question echoing in his mind. What or who will he choose, and more terrifyingly, why? Chapter 3, The Ultimatum. Ben's morning unfolds in the usual gray monotony. The dull chatter of the office, the rhythmic hum of computers and copiers, the scent of coffee laced with cheap vanilla creamer. For a brief, quiet moment, it feels almost normal, as if he's slipped back into the life he once knew. But the calm breaks when he sees a new message waiting on the printer tray. He picks it up, pulse quickening as his eyes meet the heavy black letters.
Tell no one or they will pay.
Ben's throat tightens and the paper shakes slightly in his hand. The words are brutal, unambiguous. For a moment, he simply stares, waiting for some hidden meaning to emerge, something less stark. But there's no misreading this one. The printer isn't warning him of danger in the distance. It's threatening the people around him, his people. He glances around the office, feeling suddenly exposed, like every corner, every fluorescent light is watching him. His gaze lands on his small circle. Lily, frowning at her computer screen, absent-mindedly twirling a pen. Marco, flipping through a report, lips pursed as he concentrates. Jane, on a call in her office, her face a mask of impatience. Each of them is absorbed in their own worlds, unaware that a threat lurks, not just over Ben's shoulder, but over theirs too. The reality sinks in like ice. He isn't just a pawn in whatever twisted game this is. He's a weapon, one the entity is using to manipulate, to control, and now to endanger the people who've tried to help him. Lily looks up and catches his eye, smiling faintly, but the warmth in her smile only deepens his dread. Every instinct tells him to share the message with her, to bring them all in on it and strategize a way out together. But he remembers the words on the page, the unspoken promise of harm.
Ben, you all right?
Yeah, just thinking.
She shrugs, but a small line of concern appears on her brow before she returns to her work. Ben clenches his fists, struggling against the urge to confide in her. The entity's control has wrapped around him like a vice, tightening with every passing minute. He's stuck in a vicious paradox. Keep them close, and they're in danger. Push them away, and he's isolated, utterly vulnerable. The thought simmers in him all morning. This isn't a warning for him alone. It's a demand, one with stakes that are painfully real. He realizes, almost with horror, that every choice he makes from now on isn't just about survival. It's about protection. He has to watch his words, his movements, and every decision he makes, knowing that any misstep could ripple outward and hurt the people he cares about most. He sneaks a final glance at the message, heart pounding. Whatever this is, it's far from over. Ben's night is restless, haunted by the warning's grim ultimatum.
Tell no one or they will pay.
The words loop through his mind, his thoughts twisting around them like vines, tightening until he can barely breathe. By morning, his exhaustion is etched into the circles under his eyes, and his nerves are pulled taut, ready to snap. He stumbles into the office, clutching a coffee that's doing nothing to clear the fog in his head. As he sits down, he notices Lily huddled over her desk, an unusual determination in her posture. She doesn't glance up when he arrives, her fingers flying over the keys with laser focus.
Lily.
Busy.
But there's something in her tone, a faint edge that keeps him watching her. Finally, she finishes and looks up, her face flushed with a mix of nerves and triumph.
Ben, I couldn't take it anymore. Whatever's controlling this thing, it's beyond us. So I reached out to a friend in tech, someone who knows their way around strange systems. He's going to see if he can find anything out. Trace the source, look for anomalies in the network logs, something. I'm tired of this thing calling the shots.
Her words hit him like a punch to the gut. He opens his mouth to argue, but no words come out. His mind races, caught between the relief that someone might finally expose this nightmare and the horror of the previous warning.
Tell no one or they will pay.
Lily, you shouldn't have done that.
You're sounding like Jane now, Ben. We can't just sit around waiting for this thing to strike. We need answers, and if I can't get them myself, I'll find someone who can.
He clenches his jaw, feeling that awful, invisible pressure tightening around him. He tries to explain, tries to make her see the danger without saying too much.
Lily, some things are better left alone. Whatever this is, it's aware of us, it knows our moves, and it's watching everything.
Lily meets his gaze, her face softening slightly, but a spark of defiance remains.
Ben, we're already in too deep. Every day we just sit here is another day we're at its mercy. I won't keep playing the victim.
She turns back to her computer, seemingly oblivious to his unease. Ben watches her, feeling that sickening knot of dread settle in his stomach. He wants to warn her, to tell her exactly what the message said, but the risk is too great. Every time he tries to speak, the words die in his throat, a silent reminder of the stakes. The next morning, Ben enters the office early, driven by an anxious restlessness he can't shake. He tries to avoid looking at the printer, afraid of what he'll find, but a crisp sheet waits for him in the tray. His heart sinks as he picks it up, his worst fears confirmed by the message that stares back at him.
Stop her now or suffer the consequences.
The letters feel like they're carved into the page, as though the message has taken on a life of its own. He stands frozen, unable to tear his eyes from the words. This isn't just a warning, it's a demand, a command directed at him, telling him to shut down Lily's attempt at outside help. It knows. The realization hits him hard. Whatever he's dealing with here isn't a glitch or a hoax. It's a force, aware, calculating, and deeply disturbingly personal. It's not just targeting him, it's actively pushing him to control those around him, shaping his relationships to fit its needs. He glances over at Lily, who's chatting animatedly with Jane, her face lit with a rare excitement. He feels a hollow ache in his chest, knowing that her drive to help him, to get to the truth, has put her in harm's way. For the first time, he truly understands the extent of his entrapment. He's not just a pawn, he's an enforcer, a messenger carrying out the entity's will, however unwillingly. He's been given a choice: protect her by obeying or risk her life by resisting. He swallows hard, staring at the message until the letters blur. He wants to fight, to tear it up and confront whatever force lurks behind it. But he feels powerless, cornered by the entity's suffocating presence. His throat tightens as he realizes that each decision he makes pulls him deeper into its control, while his own will slips further away. With a shaky breath, he folds the paper and tucks it into his pocket, casting a final, desperate glance at Lily. He hopes somehow she'll sense the warning, that she'll find a reason to abandon this search on her own. But as the printer's silent ultimatum hangs over him, Ben knows the choice isn't hers, it's his. The message, "You must choose," gnaws at Ben's mind. He carries it with him like a stone lodged in his chest, its weight pressing down, making it hard to think clearly. The printer's warnings were once disturbing hints, strange messages that seemed only to nudge him along, but now they feel like shackles. With each passing day, the sense of control he thought he had slips further away, tightening around him with invisible chains. He's alone in the break room, nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee, when Lily enters, giving him a tired smile. He sees the concern in her eyes, the way she watches him as though expecting him to say something, to confide. But he warning, "Stop her now, or suffer the consequences," echoes in his mind, twisting his thoughts into knots.
Ben, you look like you haven't slept in days. I know it's been a lot, but we're close, you know. The consultant said he should have some preliminary information by tomorrow.
She grins, a hopeful, genuine smile, one that used to bring him comfort. Now it only fills him with dread.
I'm glad to hear that. It'll be a relief if we can finally get some answers.
But the lie tastes bitter, and the coffee does little to wash it down. He looks past her, out the window at the city beyond. His entire world feels like it's been narrowed down to the confines of this building, each corner hiding the entity's gaze, its attention drilling into his every move. Later, as he sits at his desk, he feels the crushing pressure of its awareness, as if every thought, every decision, every glance toward his friends is tracked. Every plan he forms in his mind feels futile, broken before it even begins. He knows the entity sees through his intentions, rendering him powerless. Across the room, Jane and Marco talk in hushed voices, occasionally glancing over at him. He can feel the gap growing between him and the others, a gulf widened by suspicion, mistrust, fueled by the entity's invisible influence. He can't confide in them, can't tell them what he knows without risking their safety. It leaves him stranded, cut off from his allies and friends, each of them unknowingly stepping closer to the line he's terrified they might cross. Jane catches his eye, her expression unreadable. She studies him for a moment before turning back to Marco, her face a careful mask. He knows what she must be thinking. To them, he's become withdrawn, strange, perhaps even untrustworthy. And it's true. In a way, he no longer trusts himself either. The entity's hold over him has grown so strong that he no longer feels like his own actions belong to him. A new message appears on the printer tray that afternoon, one that makes his heart hammer in his chest.
Silence is not enough.
He stares at the words, feeling the weight of them press down on him, suffocating. It's not enough just to keep quiet. It wants him to act, to sever ties, to push them away, to ensure they can't interfere. Ben crumples the paper, his fists clenching until his knuckles go white. It's no longer just watching him. It's actively pulling him apart, taking everything he valued, everyone he trusted, and setting them against him. As he walks back to his desk, the room seems colder, the lights harsher, each face around him more distant. The entity has stripped him of his agency, turned his choices into ultimatums, and made every glance, every word, feel like another link in a chain binding him tighter. For the first time, he wonders if he'll ever truly be free again. The message, "You must choose," had been a constant refrain in Ben's mind since the moment he first saw it, a haunting, unshakable command that pushed him toward a decision he didn't fully understand. Every day, he felt the weight of that choice settling on him, suffocating, relentless. He could feel the entity tightening its grip, watching his every move, isolating him with each new warning, stripping away his control one calculated message at a time. By the time the office was empty, Ben sat alone at his desk, staring at the darkened printer in the corner. The room was cold, silent, save for the low hum of a forgotten desk fan. Outside, the city lights flickered, indifferent, while inside, Ben felt like the walls were closing in. He was left with two choices: submit to the control that had eaten away at his life, or sever the connection entirely. You must choose. The ultimatum lingered in the air, weighty and final. He stood slowly, his movements almost automatic, the choice already made. He had to end this. Whatever the cost, he couldn't live another day in the shadow of that machine's demands, its warnings, its terrible, invisible control. He moved quietly to the printer room, his heart pounding as he opened the door, glancing once over his shoulder. The office was empty, still as a grave. The printer waited in the corner, its steady green light blinking, casting an eerie glow in the darkness. He paused, feeling a surge of hesitation as he considered the warnings he had been given. Warnings that had somehow known every step, every move, every choice he had made. But he was done being a pawn.
You don't control me.
Taking a deep breath, Ben reached for the printer's power cord and yanked it from the wall. The green light faded, and for a moment he felt a spark of satisfaction. But as he stared down at the machine, he knew it wasn't enough. It wouldn't end here unless he made it end. He grabbed the edge of the printer and, with a sudden, fierce determination, lifted it and slammed it back onto the desk. The casing cracked under the impact, the satisfying sound of plastic splintering echoing through the room. His breathing grew ragged as he felt a fury he hadn't realized he was capable of. Months of fear, of control, of obedience, all released in a violent surge. He reached for a screwdriver left on the desk, jamming it into the machine's side, prying the casing open with a force that bent the metal. He pulled out wires, ripped out the circuit board, shattered the scanner glass, all with a ferocity that surprised even him. Pieces of plastic, tangled wires, and bits of metal fell around him, scattered across the floor. Every piece he destroyed felt like another chain breaking, another step closer to freedom. The message, "You must choose," still echoed in his mind, but with every swing, every break, every splinter, he felt himself reclaiming his life, piece by piece. When he finally stopped, his hands were raw, his breathing labored, his heart pounding. The printer was unrecognizable, a heap of shattered plastic and metal on the desk. Ben sank down, staring at the remains of the machine, feeling an overwhelming sense of release. For the first time in weeks, he felt he could breathe. The room was silent, eerily so. He was alone, the shadows long around him, the only sound his own shallow breathing. And as he looked down at his work, he felt a flicker of hope. Maybe he had won. Maybe it was finally over. Ben left the office feeling raw, as though he'd been stripped down to the bone. The quiet satisfaction he'd felt, tearing that printer apart, still lingered, a fleeting relief, like taking a breath after holding it underwater for too long. He'd given that machine everything he had, every ounce of frustration and fear. Now, with the printer reduced to a pile of parts, he dared to feel hopeful. Maybe, just maybe, it was over. The night air was cold, crisp against his skin as he walked home, the city's lights casting fractured reflections off the buildings. For the first time in weeks, he let himself relax, absorbing the sounds of the street, the distant hum of traffic, the faint laughter spilling out from a nearby bar. He reached his apartment door with a calm he barely recognized, a strange, tentative peace settling over him. But as he pulled out his keys, his foot brushed against something on the floor. Frowning, he looked down to find a slip of paper folded neatly, waiting as if placed there with deliberate care. A chill prickled along his spine as he bent to pick it up, his fingers already trembling. He unfolded the paper slowly, almost afraid of what he would see. And there it was, scrawled in handwriting that sent a jolt through him, unmistakable in its blocky precision.
I am not a machine.
The words were simple, even unassuming, yet they struck him like a blow. His pulse quickened, a cold wave of dread washing over him. He backed away, his shoulders pressing against the door, his mind struggling to comprehend what this meant. He had been so sure that destroying the printer would free him, that tearing apart the machine would sever the link to this thing, whatever it was. But this note, it confirmed what he feared most. The warnings hadn't been bound to the printer, to anything tangible he could control. No, this was something far more elusive, something that watched him from the shadows, slipping into his life with an intimacy that defied reason. He read the note again, his stomach twisting.
I am not a machine.
The message was clear, unyielding, taunting. The entity hadn't been tied to the technology. It had only used the machine as a conduit, a tool to deliver its messages, its commands. And now, with the printer gone, it had chosen a new method. It could reach him anywhere, anytime, without barriers. A whisper of movement stirred outside, the hallway quiet, but suddenly heavy with the feeling that he wasn't alone. He glanced around, his breath shallow, half expecting to see a figure lurking in the shadows. But there was nothing, only the empty corridor, his dimly lit apartment door, and the note in his trembling hand. Ben slipped inside, locking the door behind him, his eyes scanning every shadow as though they might hold answers or threats. He sank into the chair by his kitchen table, the note crumpled in his fist, the reality of his situation sinking in with an unbearable weight. The entity was everywhere, not confined to wires or circuits, not something he could unplug or destroy. It was something deeper, unseen, something that knew him in ways he could barely fathom. His hand tightened around the note, crushing the words into his palm as he felt himself teetering on the edge of a realization more terrifying than anything he'd faced so far. There was nowhere he could hide. It was watching, waiting, embedded in his life in ways he couldn't shake, couldn't even begin to understand. The printer had only been the beginning. Chapter 4: The Aftermath. The morning after finding the note, I am not a machine, Ben wakes with an unusual sense of calm. Sunlight filters softly through his blinds, and for the first time in weeks, he allows himself to breathe, hoping that maybe, somehow, it's over. The printer's wreckage, the furious destruction, all of it feels distant now, like a fading nightmare. He tells himself he's taken back control. As he steps outside, the world feels sharper, clearer. The city's hum surrounds him, comforting in its normalcy. By the time he reaches his desk, he almost believes it. But as he settles in, a faint tension creeps in, like a quiet, lurking pressure at the edge of his mind. Every sound in the office, the clicks, the hum of machines, feels amplified, almost as if they hold a quiet, watchful awareness. His sense of calm begins to slip, replaced by a silent, creeping unease. The next few days bring no relief. Lily appears at his desk, her face pale, clutching her phone. She shows him an email she received in the early hours, a photo of her desk with the caption, "I see you." Ben's stomach tightens.
Are you sure it's not a glitch?
Even he doesn't believe his own words.
It's not a glitch, Ben. It's as if it's watching us like it knows.
By the following day, Marco confronts him, visibly shaken after finding graffiti scrawled across his windshield. "He can't protect you." And Jane, usually so composed, admits that her voicemail has been filling with static-laden whispers calling her name. Ben watches his friends grow tense, wary, each of them now under the same invisible gaze. The entity has slipped into their lives, invading the most personal spaces, stretching beyond technology into their everyday world. The dread gnaws at him, filling every waking moment. The entity has moved beyond him, entangling his friends in its hold, its messages now woven into the fabric of their lives. Each glance over their shoulders, each missed call, each flicker of a screen reminds him that they're all exposed, drawn into something he can't escape. The breaking point comes late one night as Ben walks home, the cold air pressing in as he tries to calm his thoughts. The street is empty, save for the occasional car passing by, its headlights casting brief, shifting shadows across the buildings. His footsteps echo in the silence, his only companion in the lonely darkness. His phone buzzes, sudden and jarring, vibrating against his leg. Ben freezes, a pulse of cold dread running through him as he pulls it from his pocket. The screen glows in the night, displaying a single message.
"Watch out, for I am everywhere."
He stares at the words, feeling his heart pound against his ribs, each beat louder than the last. The world around him feels suddenly surreal, as if he's stepped into some twisted version of reality, where every shadow hides the entity, every sound is its voice, every corner is a trap. He glances up, his eyes wide, scanning the street for any sign of movement, any sign of anything, and then he notices it, a faint creaking above, metal straining under an invisible force. He looks up just in time to see a scaffold swaying precariously, its beams shifting as if pushed by unseen hands, poised to fall. A surge of panic floods him, and he stumbles back, narrowly avoiding the path of the looming structure. The scaffolding groans one last time before settling, the eerie silence returning, its weight heavy in the air. He stands there, gasping for breath, his pulse racing as he realizes the full extent of the entity's power. It's no longer bound by the office or any piece of technology. It isn't limited by wires, screens, or devices. It is everywhere, an ever-present force, lurking in every shadow, ready to strike at a moment's notice. It has transcended the limitations of the physical world, expanding into every crevice of his life, beyond anything he can fight. With trembling hands, Ben pockets his phone and stumbles away, every step echoing with the terrifying truth he can no longer deny. He is, and always will be, under its watch. The entity has become his silent, unseen shadow, woven into every breath, every glance, every step. And as Ben moves forward, he feels the finality of his situation settle over him. There's no fight, no escape, only an existence shared with a presence he can neither see nor control. He is, and always will be, under its watch.